Welcome to the Busy Wise podcast. My name is Leslie Wilson, and I'm your host. Each week, we have special guests join us and share part of their story and the wisdom that they've learned through it. Today's guest is Abbie Mantor. She has a doctorate of theology, and she has a lot to share about what she's learned in her life and how her education has only deepened her understanding of her life experiences. Her wisdom and experience and knowledge just really is an encouragement, and I can't wait to share it with you. So without further ado, here's our conversation. I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Abbie Mantor to the podcast. Hi, Abbie.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that we get to do this. Now, we know each other because our daughters became best friends playing Among Us during COVID.
Yes. Suddenly all this, there was a Bella talked about all the time in my house. I'm like, who is this Bella?
Who is this Bella? Who are they? Well, and then y'all moved away, and that did not matter to them. We have gotten to see you even though you were far away, and that's been such a neat blessing. But so what I found exciting is getting to know you. We did a weekend in Chicago, which was a blast. And then hearing a little bit about your life and where you came from. So I'd love to start there. I'd love for you to share a little bit about your life and how you got to where you are now and how that went.
Okay, that's a big question. So I grew up in a really, really, really small town in northeast Iowa. It's called Strawberry Point. It's the home of the world's largest strawberry. It's the only claim to fame that we have. It's about 1,500 people. So growing up, if I wanted McDonald's, it was an hour drive to get to McDonald's. There was back in the day before Walmart, Kmart was half an hour away. And so grew up in a small town. I was raised by my grandma, my sister. I have an older sister and I. So the three of us kind of, figured out life together, so to speak. I was the valedictorian of my senior class, which is what it is. I guess it leaves you with a lot of expectations of where you're going to go in life and that you know what you want to do. And I actually had no idea what I wanted to do when I left high school, though I pretended quite well for a while. But it really took me another 10 years past that to really figure out where I was going and what I was going to do in life. In that amount of time, I had a couple kids. Now I have 4 kids that are mostly grown. So Leah, who's friends with your daughter, is my baby, about to graduate next year. That's the big 100-foot overview of where I am and what I've done.
It's so interesting to me because when I met you, you were here in Columbia, and I knew you were from the Midwest. Like, that was about my understanding, and that you were getting your doctorate, I think, when I met you. And so I'm fascinated by how from Strawberry Point you got to a doctorate in theology. Give us your exact doctorate.
Yep. So it's a PhD in biblical studies with a concentration in Old Testament. Which just means I know a lot about the book of Job, is really what it means.
And that's something we're going to get to because I'm fascinated about Job and about what you've learned from Job. I really am excited about that. You told me once that in your educational journey, it kind of was this winding path. And from being valedictorian through that winding path, how did that get you to the book of Job?
So I graduated from high school as the valedictorian, and I started at a private Christian university. In that first year, I changed my major 3 or 4 times to all sorts of things. Ultimately wasn't the best fit for me, so I left that school, and I did enroll in community college, where I got a 1-year diploma in floral design. got into the flower industry. And although I had worked at a flower shop, I really did not like it. It was not where I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to do. In that amount of time, though, between starting my floral design degree and finishing it, I did get married, and he had a son already, so I began raising him. He was 2.5. And then shortly thereafter, getting married, had a second kid. So I was doing the mom thing, working part-time here or there. And when those two were still pretty little, I decided that I actually wanted to go back to school. And this time I was sure I knew what I wanted. And that was I wanted to go into Christian radio. So I chose a school. Olivet Nazarene University had a great radio program, and we moved to Illinois, and I started in their radio program. And in that, I kept taking classes related to religion and or writing, because I really loved both of those things. And I ended up graduating with a journalism degree because it was shorter and got me done quicker. And when I had 2 kids already, quicker was better. And I could still go into radio with a journalism degree. So that was kind of my plan. And I graduated in May of 2006 on a Saturday, and the next Friday, my 3rd child was born. So I did not walk across the stage. I waddled across the stage. I was the only person, because this is a very, very conservative Christian school. And so at that time, very few non-traditional students were on campus. And so I was the only pregnant one for sure. And so I kind of felt out of place for sure. But I finished that last semester, even 8 months pregnant, survived and graduated, got my journalism degree. And from there, radio didn't quite work out for me. And so I went into marketing with my journalism degree. That was an easy transition to make. Worked for a good company, but I was still unhappy. I just didn't know what I wanted or where I was going. And so in the spring of '09 at Easter, someone said to me, goes, "Abbie, you know what you're supposed to do." I was like, please tell me. I've been looking for all this time to try to figure out what I wanted to do. And they said, "You're supposed to be a college professor." And the moment they said that, it like resonated with my soul. And I knew that if I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to teaching something, it was going to be the Bible. Okay. Those two things in an instant became my reality, which meant that I had to go to seminary in order to get the degrees necessary for that, because in order to teach in higher ed, you really need to have a PhD. So a lot of my colleagues, when I was getting my PhD, they were getting their PhD because they loved research or they loved their topic or something like that. And I really was just doing it because it was a hoop that I had to jump through in order to teach. So we moved to Kentucky, which is where I went to Asbury Theological Seminary. I got my master's degree. During my master's degree, though, I actually started going to a church and started kind of processing my call to ministry, my relationship with God. And it was at that point where I realized that I really loved Jesus, but I didn't really think that I needed Jesus because I was a pretty good person. So that's actually where I gave my life to Christ, which was great and transformational. And then I thought, I don't need education anymore, which was a mistake, but I grew in who I was in Christ. I served at the church. I went back into marketing. And then a few years into that, I was like, I'm still miserable. Like, what's going on?
That didn't fix it, God. That didn't fix it.
What? I was still miserable when it came to my job and the direction and what I was doing. And so I really prayed about it, and window opened that I decided, no, I really do want to teach. I really do want to get my PhD. And so I finished up my master's. I think I had 2 years or a year and a half, maybe it was a year and a half, that I had to finish up my degree before my credits started to expire. So I was taking classes like a mad woman. At this point, my youngest had been born. So I had 4 kids. When we moved to Kentucky, my youngest was 1 year old and my oldest was 11. So she does not know me outside of going to school. So I finished my master's, and I finished in August. And a week later, I started my PhD, also at Asbury. So there was no break in between whatsoever. Young kids. I was working part-time here or there as I needed to. And I dove right into my PhD. I did my coursework. It took me about 3 years to do that. And then that's when we moved to South Carolina, where I studied for my comprehensive exams. So I was up when we were in South Carolina every morning at 4 a.m. doing Hebrew vocabulary. I had flashcards. I had a whole system going because if I failed that, I was just done with the program. So I did that. So during COVID, I passed my comprehensive exams right before COVID. And then during COVID, I wrote my proposal and my dissertation, and then graduated in May of 2025. Nope, that was just a little bit ago, 2023. So 2 years ago, I got to graduate. So that's kind of the journey of it. The other question you asked is, how did I get to Job? Which is, so again, like some people go into scholarly work because they have a topic that they just really want to dive into and understand. And for me, because I was in such a rush to get my master's done, I had to take, basically, the technical term for it is an exegesis class, where we would read the Hebrew from one particular book of the Bible, discuss the grammar, what it meant, and it was like 700 level, kind of the highest thing that I had to do. And because I was in such a crunch, I just had to take whatever class was available at that time. So I didn't get to pick. It didn't matter what I wanted to take. I had to take, and it happened to be wisdom literature. And the professor who ended up being my mentor in my PhD is the one who taught it. And we went through the book of Job. And I had read Job before, and I was familiar with Job. But in that class, I really enjoyed Job a lot. I learned a lot. I grew a lot. I thought a lot. I pushed back against my professor a lot, which was fun. And then at the end, I had to write this paper about something in Job. And so I did. It was the longest paper I'd ever written. And incidentally, when you go to apply for a PhD program, you have to submit a paper. And that paper needs to be related to whatever it is you want to do your PhD in. So suddenly I wanted to do my PhD in Job because that was the paper that I had. And I figured once I get accepted, I could change it, be no big deal. And that was true, except what I found is that every class that I took, I did that class with Job. So I took a history of interpretation. So we read like early church fathers and what they said about various things in the Bible and theology and whatever. And so my paper that I wrote for that class was Pope Gregory's interpretation of Job. And then I took an Isaiah class. And so I took a prophets class. It was the prophets. And so I compared where Jeremiah curses the day of his birth with where Job cursed the day of his birth. So it didn't matter what class I was taking, I was researching Job. And then it became quite apparent to me that I just needed to stick with Job. My kids started teasing me, saying that I was married to Job or Job was my boyfriend or whatever. And I was like, I guess I just love Job. So I don't know. I didn't pick him. He picked me, maybe. I was forced into him, but I couldn't get away from him. No matter how hard I tried, I could not get away from him.
Okay. So for those of us who are not familiar with Job, the book itself. Tell me a
Mhm.
little bit about it. Like, don't give me PhD level because I'm not ready, but maybe like Intro to Job
Yeah.
101.
Yeah. Yeah. So the book of Job is found in the Old Testament. It is considered a wisdom book because it's not necessarily historical. There's arguments if Job was real or not, but it tells us about how we ought to live. That's what all the wisdom books do in the Old Testament. So, like Psalms or Proverbs, also wisdom books. It's a story about a guy who was very rich and very faithful to God. And in the course of seeing his faithfulness, God enters into a challenge as to if Job is being faithful to God because God blesses him, or does Job really just love God himself? And so, in that challenge, God agrees to let everything be taken away from Job so that he can be tested. Does he love God, or does he love the stuff that God gives him? Job remains faithful to God in the beginning. He does throughout the entire book, but then three friends come to comfort Job. Most of the book is these friends being bad friends and telling Job that he deserved what he got because they don't know about what's going on in heaven, right? So they're just like, bad things are happening to you. You must be a bad person. And Job is saying, no, I'm not a bad person, so I don't deserve these bad things. They argue a lot for like 30 some chapters. At the end, God comes in and talks to Job as a friend, and a stern friend, but a friend. And Job is comforted by what God has to say about God's justice and the way that he rules the universe. And at the end, Job gets everything back, which is frustrating for a real Job scholar, but he gets everything back and everything is hunky-dory.
Interesting. I don't know that I understood that there was argument over whether it was allegorical or literal. I can understand that, but I don't know that I knew that. I think it's interesting that you said that his friends came over to comfort him, and then they were bad friends, and then they were giving him advice because they didn't know what was going on in heaven. Because I immediately went, that feels familiar.
It does. It does.
It feels real to life.
It is. It is. That's what I always say, because I've preached on Job, taught on Job, and I was like, the friends were really, really great friends until they opened their mouth. So maybe we can learn something from that, right? Like sometimes be a great friend is to keep your mouth shut. So yeah, that's Job.
That's so interesting. So in the course of studying Job, were there things that you learned that you really applied to where you were in life during that whole process?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. On lots of levels, actually. And people would often ask, right, like, why Job? And the other thing is that my look at Job specifically, because you can't write a dissertation on the entire book of Job, is I looked at how Job and the friends interacted, and really just Job and the first friend. So I looked at three speeches because they go back and forth throughout that whole middle section. And then I looked at modern psychological studies. So like psychologists asking people about their trauma, their grief, and what we can learn from psychology on how to care for people like Job in our lives.
Okay.
Yeah, and I found some really, really fascinating stuff. The most transformational thing, I think, for me, and this is what I will normally teach on and preach on and talk about, is there is a study, and I'm going to blank on his name, Richard Allen Beck, who looked at, he said that primarily we, like as Christians, and really even just anybody in life, but particularly he was looking at Christians, they think that in order to be a good, faithful Christian, you have to be happy and joyful and trusting God. I'm a child of the 90s, so from Ren and Stimpy, happy, happy, joy, joy is what I always refer to, that that's the way to be a good Christian, a good faithful follower of God. And if you are not, if you are sad, depressed, angry, that you are not representing God very well, and the goal is for the happy people to grab the sad people and pull them back to happy. And you see this, like if you're around anybody who is suffering any kind of a loss or grieving any thing in their life, you hear things like, God's got a plan for you, or God needed another angel, or there's all these things, which is trying to get somebody out of their grief and back to happy. What Richard Allen Beck found, though, is that line, that continuum, isn't actually entirely accurate, because you can be happy and excited, and you can do that with God, but you can also do that without God. I've got plenty of friends who I love dearly, who are great people and are happy and content in their life, and things are going really well for them, but they don't care about God at all. And equally, you can have people who are really struggling, like Job, but they're struggling with God. And so what he developed was more of like the quadrants. So he called him a summer Christian, which is a person who is with God, having a great time. And then you can also have a winter Christian, or a winter experience of faith, for a time, or for your personality. You grieve, but you're grieving with God, which is opposed to the bottom quadrants, who do those things without God. And that really resonated with me. I find it resonates with a lot of people, but it really resonated with me because I grew up, I told you I was raised by my grandmother. That was because my parents were killed in a drunk driving accident when I was 2. So I've grown up with this kind of grief and processing what it meant to live in the consequences of other people's choices my whole life. And to hear that, like, I connect with God better in grief than I necessarily do in happiness, because I've been through so much grief in my life. And so to go, hey, that's actually still a valid expression of faith. I felt very seen in that, and very known. And what Job contributes to that is, that's Job, right? So if God cares enough about Job to put his story in the Bible, how much does he care about me and my grief, right? Or my friends in their suffering and their losses within their life. So I found that to be really helpful. Since all of that, there's been other things in my life that I feel like a little bit like Job, like everything kind of fell apart in my life. But yeah, like just that knowing that God sees the Jobs, I like to call them the sufferers among us, and cares enough about them to give them voice. And I mean, at the end, God showed up and talked with Job personally like a friend. Says a lot to those of us who carry grief and loss in our lives.
That's so special to me. I think I know that my personality is the, extrovert. I don't know, my Myers-Briggs, I always say, is the one that can't remember what the Myers-Briggs letters are. But I'm pretty sure it's ENFP, but it's this, like extroverted, I'm going to look for the best in people. I told a coworker that I operate from this place that's, that people have the best of intentions going in until they prove something else to me. And it is easy for me to connect to God when I can see the through line, when I can see the joy, and when I can see the answer at the end. But we've had a season, I don't know, 7-8 years. Is that a season or an era? Is maybe in our era, in our family, of just medical challenge after medical challenge. And I am finding in that's where there's so much growth for me spiritually because I feel a lot of times isolated, which is not great for the people who don't know what their Myers-Briggs are, the ENFPs of the group, but I feel isolated even when I'm around people because our circumstances are so crazy, and so I am learning to understand God's work and God's movement, even when I am kind of pulled away from everything that would normally feed me, the community of faith that would normally feed me. Well, we've had since COVID, thing after thing after thing that's really kind of isolated us from communities of faith. And then, when I'm pulled away from the joy that I kind of relied on, the joy of the Lord is my strength. Hey.
Mm-hmm.
And you said 90s church, and I'm like, and then radio, and I'm all like, oh, so we could sing all the same songs together, like all of them. But so it's amazing to me that God takes us into these places where for you learned Job, mm-hmm. and then saw that through line all the way through. And for me, where I kind of was really comfortable, in what I felt like I was called to do and then this era has happened, and I've had to reevaluate a lot of that and find God in the grieving and find God in the struggle. So I think there's so much to learn in that, I think, because I was thinking about when you were talking about how we like to, give people platitudes that it's okay. I heard a pastor talk about, there was a sweet little old lady in his church who lost her husband. And one of my favorite verses is Romans 8:28, which says, God works all things together for the good of those who love the Lord, who are called according to his purpose. And the pastor walked up to the little lady and said, hey, how's it going? How you doing? And she said, I think I'm going to punch the next person that quotes Romans 8:28 to me.
Yes.
And it took me back when he told that story. I was like, ooh, do I do that? And
yeah, we all do. We all do, because we get in these situations we don't know what to say. So we just say stupid stuff. Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about my words lately, about just how I approach situations, because the extrovert just wants to tell all the things and share whatever is sitting at the top of my mind, and there's a lot of wisdom in not doing that.
Sometimes, yes.
There's a lot of wisdom in waiting and being measured. And so that's an area of growth for me. But I think about how much that we do that, and how much people have, gently and very helpfully tried to say that to us in this season, and how I'm thankful for them and I'm thankful for their encouragement, but it's challenging to go, yes, I know God has a plan. And yes, I know that there's a purpose. And yes, I know that it could be worse, or, like whatever that is. But that knowledge doesn't make it hurt less, or doesn't make me less lonely, or whatever that is.
Yeah. One of the things that, as I talk about Job, that I always emphasize, because the more I study just the Bible in general, but even Job, is that, and it's common in American culture to think that, and people say it and they use the words around it, and I don't know if they don't know what they're saying or if they genuinely believe it, but like that God does these things to us. And then we're left to go, okay, well, I need to learn the lesson that God is forcing me into so that I can get out of it. Or, man, I'm a horrible person that all this stuff happened to me. And that's not helpful, and it's not biblical. I truly believe that these awful things happen to us because we live in a broken world. Because not only do we hurt one another, right, which is like my case where somebody else's choice, I'm living with the consequences of that, but in the fall of humanity, the entirety of creation is broken, right? And so that's where sicknesses come from. Sickness was not God's original plan. People dying in natural disasters was not part of God's natural plan. All of that is part of the brokenness that we're in. And God will meet us in the broken places because of his grace, and he will care for us there. But I strongly push against the God gave me this. It's like, no, this isn't like, you cannot tell me. Like, and if you know anything about the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 8, which means that if you catch me in the right mood, you will hear what I think, even if it's hard to hear. And so there have been people who, have tried to say, like it's God's good plan for me to not have parents. Like, really? 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 Yeah, like you can't genuinely look somebody in the eye and really believe that, right? My friends who struggle with infertility, that would be fantastic parents. And people say, well, it's just not God's plan for you to have a baby. Really? I think it's God's plan for everybody to be fruitful and multiply, but the brokenness of this world breaks that apart. And so God is with us in our despair, and he cares for us, and he brings community along with us. But I don't think he causes it. I think he's, there's a line, is it from Selma? It is the movie about MLK going down to protest in Selma. And in the movie, so I don't know if this is actually true or not, but it was a great line in the movie. He visits the father of a young man who was killed in the protest, or just beaten outside of the protest, unjustly killed. And what the Martin Luther King Jr. character says, he looks this dad in the eye and he says, God was the first to cry. And he said it multiple times. God was the first to cry. And I think that's so true. That in our grief and in our pain, that God is the first to feel all the feelings. And then the other thing that I learned, and this is psychology, but psychology is just describing the way the God created the world. But modern psychology has found that the people who sit in their grief or their pain or their anger, and let those emotions say what they need to say, initially will show signs of more like negative mood. But if they allow themselves to feel those things, they allow themselves to process that grief, they allow themselves to ask the really hard questions like, why God? How could this be? They tend to recover at a stronger kind of resilience than people who kind of flatline and tell themselves the bumper stickers, right? Like, God must have a plan, or, I'm fine, I'm okay, like, I'm going to make the best of this. And they stay stagnant the entire time, where the other people will tank, but they will come back up higher. So what that has said to me, both levels in my grief, like, sit there, let it speak to me. I had a well-meaning gentleman at a church I once attended say, well, you don't want to be too sad for too long, because that will get a hold of you and you won't be able to get out. Like, that's literally not how grief works. Like, that's not how it works. But we're scared of it. We're afraid of it because we don't know how to grieve. We don't know how to lament as a culture. And so we get uncomfortable, and so we avoid it. But for me to allow myself to grieve, but then to allow the people around me to grieve as well, to let them be angry. Job was really angry at God, and God still spoke with him and restored him and cared for him. So if God's okay with anger and questions and grief and pain, why am I not? So you can say some pretty blasphemous things around me in your anger, and I will sit and say, yeah, that's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that anger is valid. That grief really hurts because it's true.
Wow. And all of these things that you've learned and you're learning, what are the things that you would love to teach if you just had if you had carte blanche, if you could tell the whole world, here's the one thing, here's the one thing, the main thing. Is there something that you would specifically give?
That we need to intentionally develop our empathy and our skills to care for those who are suffering around us. We can't just wait until we get into the moment and hope we do okay. We owe it to our friends and our loved ones and ourselves, because we will all experience suffering as well, to be prepared, to be compassionate, to have better words, or at least know to say no words. Yeah, probably that. And we should do that because God has first done that for us. That He sits with us and He is prepared and He is compassionate. There's several verses. It's all throughout the Old Testament, but that I would cling to as a kid is the many verses about how God is close, or cares for the widows and the orphans. And widows and orphan, I think, is a fancy way really of saying the suffering. The people who have been hurt by this world, and God pays special attention to them. I think they get a little bit of extra support, a little bit of extra care, because they're not receiving that in this world. Right? So some people, I have lots of friends who received love and support from their mom and dad growing up. And I had a great grandmother, and a fantastic grandmother. But she was never my mom and my dad. And so there are ways in which I've seen that God has stepped in and cared for me, especially as a father, that other people got from their dad, if they had a good dad. Some of my friends didn't have a good dad, and I think God cares for them in special, unique ways as well, because He sees the brokenness of this world, and he has to respond. It's just who He is.
So one last question. What is the best piece of advice that you ever received?
Yes. So actually, I have a list of axioms. There's probably like 10 of them on there. And so I could use any of those. Some of them I quote all the time. But as I was thinking about kind of my education journey and just who I am, I'm a teacher. So it does not matter what I'm doing, right? If I'm in marketing, or if I am at home with my family, or if I am at work, I'm always a teacher. And some advice I actually got from my journalism professor in college, Dr. Chenoweth. We were walking along campus. He was rattling on about something. I don't even know what it was. But he said something that has always stuck with me. He said, once we learn something, we forget what it's like to not know it.
Huh.
Yeah, once we learn something, we forget what it's like to not know it. And what that said to me was, I need to be a person of empathy who remembers and knows that there are people around me who don't know what I know. Whether that's like obvious for the classroom, right? So I step into an Old Testament literature classroom, and they don't know about suzerain vassal treaties in the ancient Near East, but I do. And so I have to teach that to them and help them to process what that means and what it means for the Old Testament, right? when I'm teaching Hebrew, right? Like they don't even know what the letters mean, let alone how to identify the past narrative or an infinitive, right? So in the classroom, there's a certain level of, okay, I need to have grace. I need to make sure that I know how to clearly explain this so that they can go along the process. But in life, it also really applies because, so if you think about the sufferers among us, I have sat in grief for most of my life, at various times, processing it in various ways. Over the last several years, I've processed a different kind of grief, and I sat in it for a long time. And in that, sitting in that, God has spoken things to me. He has rewritten pieces of my identity, pieces of the way that I interact with the world. And I have grown through that process. But when I step in to care for somebody in their suffering, like if they're brand new and maybe they've lost a loved one or they're going through a divorce or whatever it happens to be, they have not sat with God for as long as I have. And that's a messy, messy process. It took me 15 years to learn how to set a good, healthy boundary with somebody and then stick to it, right? Like, and how obnoxious that had to be. Like, I remember the first person who's like, hey, Abbie, you should probably set a boundary and say, hey, that's not going to be okay way to treat me. And I was like, yeah. And that was 15 years ago. And I'm sure she was frustrated but I just didn't know and I wasn't ready. And so keeping that at the top of my mind to say, just because somebody doesn't know something doesn't mean they're not smart, doesn't mean they're not capable, and it doesn't mean that they're ready to learn it either. So I need to sit with them in that process and give them grace and give them tools and watch them fail and give them love and support even in that, right? So that's coworkers, that's people at the checkout line. I mean, that's like everywhere. Some people just don't know, and that's okay. And I can teach and I can support, but mostly it helps me to see them as another person who's on their journey, just like I'm a person on my journey.
I think I can see all the applications. I'm here processing going, how many times do we expect someone to have the same, even, pick a subject, any subject that you feel passionate about or that you just know stuff about. Mm-hmm. And someone says something and you're like, well, that person, I can't believe they would say that. And then you go, oh, they don't have any of the context that I have. They don't have any of the context that other people have. I was listening to a podcast the other day and the lady said, not every disagreement needs to become a debate. And I was like, whoa, because I was like, how many times is it like, no, but I know about this and I need to tell you about this right this minute because I know about this. So you don't know what I know about this. And so I'm going to tell you. And so stepping back from that and going, hey, they don't know this like I know this, and they might not be ready to learn this yet.
And the other side of that is maybe there's something I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of some things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the other, I always think of this. In Indiana, it's the BMV, and usually it's the DMV or whatever, right? But I always think of this when I go to like register a vehicle in a different state. Right? This is like the website and the people who are there clearly don't know that you don't know their system. They have forgotten what it is like to not know their system, right?
Yes.
That's like the perfect example. And so I always remember that. I go, okay, don't be the DMV. Don't be the DMV.
I love that. That's great. That's wonderful.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I appreciate so much about what you shared. And we're going to have to do another conversation because you have a really special Facebook page. And I think you said you were going to start a Substack about where you are now and what you're learning now. And it's such a special thing. And I would love to leave the conversation here, but we're absolutely going to have another conversation at another time about that. But will you share the name of your page so that people can find you? Because I'm loving it, and I want to make sure everybody gets to see it.
Thank you. That's so sweet. Yes. So here I am with a PhD in biblical studies. And my full-time job right now for this season is a heavy equipment operator at a landfill. So yeah, which is great. My grandma calls me Dr. Dump, which is awesome. But I've decided in this season that I'm going to make the best of it, and I'm going to have fun, and I'm going to see the lightheartedness. Job is wisdom, and so I am finding wisdom in my job at the landfill. So my Facebook page is called Wisdom from the Trash Heap. And I share things like some things are just fun and funny that I see, because you see all kinds of things in the landfill. It's very fun. But then also, like, I'll run into things and it connects with other parts of my life. And so I'm learning about life and God and people and all those kind of things. And so I share that there as well.
I love it so much. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm so excited. We'll just have to decide when we're doing part 2, because I'm so excited to hear about those other paths through that you have taken, and the lessons you've learned there. But for now, we'll leave it here. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
When Abbie talked about the one thing she would teach everyone if she had a chance to tell the whole world something, and that being that we need to be prepared to help people through their suffering, it really paused me. And I thought about how many times it's so easy to skirt around suffering, whether it's someone that we know and love or whether it's the stranger in our world. Either way, we tend to be unprepared when we live in a world where it should be the opposite. I hope that the conversation really blessed you like it blessed me. I hope that you were impacted and that the wisdom Abbie talked us through made a difference for you today. On our next episode, I have a wonderful conversation with my cousin Emily, and she talks about an interrupted life and all of the blessings and challenges that come with it. And I'd like to encourage you to look around your everyday life and consider what wisdom are you learning and who you can share it with.